All right. Welcome everybody to PDS Connect and welcome to the future. I am Kerry Marty. I'm the Principal Consultant for IT Lifecycle Management at PDS, and I am joined today with my good friend and long-term colleague, TJ Peterson. TJ, say hi.
Hi, TJ Peterson, architect in our digital workspace.
And we're here to talk about supporting the remote user. You know, certainly a lot happened in the last 6 months, and we had to do a lot of things to get people working. But I don't think there's any going back. And I myself have talked to dozens of people, both people I work with professionally and people that I have as friends, that they're really never going to go back to the office. They made the decision that they want to work from home, and or they've been given the permission to be able to work from home. So we now have to think about how we're going to support these users moving forward. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So a little agenda here. I'm not going to go through here line item by line item. But the main thing, you got to have a plan. We're going to talk a little bit about policy. And then we kind of walk through the life cycle. I'm a life cycle management guy. So we're going to walk through the various stages of the life cycle on stuff that you need to be able to do to support the home user in a new way. All right, you got to have a plan. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a movie buff, and I always love to insert little clips into my presentations. So I've got an appropriate one here for you today.
Well, what's the plan? I think the first thing we gotta do, see if old Stumpy's still out there. Can I borrow that shovel?
Yeah.
Doesn't he have a home to go to? That's why Edgar never got down off that damn tower.
I think I have an idea.
You know, we're gonna have to come up with some sort of plan. He's just gonna wait us to death.
Yeah, well, I was
Why don't we
thinking
just make a run for it? We outran him yesterday. Run for it? Running's not a plan. The running's what to do when the plan fails. Valentine, you're not even trying to think of a plan. Well, it ain't like we got a hell of a lot of options. Always options. We just gotta think of them, that's all. Alright, well, why don't you start thinking? Well, what the hell do I always control a thing? Who died and made you Einstein?
you guys died at pole vault! We just stay where it can't get us. On these residual boulders. My truck's parked right next to one.
Those are some of my favorite words in cinema. Running's not a plan. Running's what you do when a plan fails. So over the last 5-6 months or so, we've had to run a lot. Certainly in the beginning of the lockdowns, everybody was running and scrambling to get people equipment, to get them home working and productive. And I think we in the IT industry did a fantastic job of responding to that and reacting as quickly as possible. But that being said, we did do a lot of reacting, and now it's time to put together an actual plan of how we're going to do this moving forward. So starting with policy, good policies lead to good processes and good use of your tools, okay? What we're talking about here is not policies. These are policies that you put down on paper more than ones that are scripting, if you know what I mean. When you have good policies at the beginning, it helps you to choose the right tool, help you implement it correctly, and basically manage your end users a lot better. The other thing I want to say about it, though, is a good policy is not this is the way we do it or else, but rather this is the way we do it unless, okay? Policies help us define exceptions. If you don't have policies, then everything is an exception, but you should always have an exception process for every policy that you put into place. Just make sure you don't have a ton of them. We're going to have, by the way, policies referenced throughout the different things that we talk about today. So TJ, why don't you take off on the design here?
Yeah, so looking at the design, more really, we need to be able to manage and support our devices. So we had a way that we manage support devices prior to the pandemic. We were probably starting to talk about some cloud strategies, or maybe starting to implement them, or maybe well down the road to implementing, but somewhere in that, somewhere in that span of things. But when the pandemic hit, like Carrie said, we kind of reacted. We had to get our users working. We had to be able to support them. We had to be able to manage them. Now, hopefully that's at least slowed down a little bit. We got people working, they're working remote, and we need to go back and accelerate maybe some of those things that we were talking about prior to that. Maybe we're going to take 2 or 3 years or longer and slowly adopt some of these new things. Well, now we've got users, again, like Carrie said, they're not coming back. We need to support them and manage them remotely. They're maybe not going to VPN in, they don't need to. They're not going to come into the office, but we still need to keep them secure. We need to still be able to manage them. One of the things we can do to be effective at doing that is doing a better job at simplifying our workspace, simplifying the technologies that we use, maybe eliminating some technologies or consolidating some technologies. Less we have to deploy to the user, the less we have to support, less we have to manage, less we have to patch, all that good stuff. When we look at some of the listed technologies we have here, a lot of the Microsoft technologies, but the reason I do that is I see that that's where a lot of people were. A lot of people are starting to deploy Office 365 or have deployed Office 365 or gone Exchange Online. We look then, Microsoft has done a good job of progressing the Intune into the Microsoft tools and linking in with SCCM to manage our devices and using OneDrive to be able to store our data and back up our data and Autopilot to be able to deploy devices. So we can see it's kind of a whole suite of tools. And we mention it because they work well together and you might already be licensed for them. Again, depending on the license you have for Office 365 already, you might have all these tools that you can start to put in place, maybe accelerate putting them in place to be able to better manage the remote user. There's a good chance you might have third-party tools that can do the same thing as well. So it doesn't really matter to me whether it's Microsoft or Landesk or Ivanti or Google or whatever it might be, but just look at what you have, take advantage of what you have to be able to manage those mobile remote devices and kind of accelerate that plan from maybe where you were before, and make sure, again, any new things, that's our policy adoption, kind of cloud first. Any new things that you're going to do are, can we do it that it's going to support our remote workforce versus a more on-premise type tool that we might have looked at before.
All right, thank you, TJ. All right, well, let's talk equipment. Okay, because there's going to need to be some changes to equipment to make people more flexible and give them different places to work. There will be offices and people will be going into offices. And so, our first point is you have to have flexible office space. Your workers are more mobile and what they may need is something that you're looking at in the picture here is something where they just go into a generic space right in a building and they sit down and they start working. Maybe there's a docking station there where they're plugging their laptop into, or maybe they're just using docking or any space where they can just step in and start working. TJ, you got a story related to this that you told me.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we were in downtown Milwaukee for an event called Open Doors Milwaukee. There's a bunch of buildings that are open that you maybe normally wouldn't get to go in and see. And one of them, my family and I went to go check out, was the relatively new Northwestern Mutual Life Tower. You can go out and see over Lake Michigan and that kind of stuff. So it was pretty cool to see. But when I was there, I was talking to one of the employees. I was kind of showing people around, and one thing he mentioned was not just spaces like this that you're talking about, flexible office space, but the entire building. So all 20, 30, I can't remember how many floors it was, but the entire building was all flexible office space. Nobody had an assigned space to them. I imagine it looked a lot, like what you're showing here in the picture.
And I've been working with a few clients myself where we've been helping them deploy stuff, and that's what it is. We're deploying monitors and stuff for people to plug into. So it certainly is a new trend. And, it is work from anywhere. If they want to work from home, they can work from home. If they want to come into the office and meet with folks, they can come into the office, but then they have a place to dock. That introduces questions of maybe is it time for BYOD? Bring your own device. Okay, if you do implement some of the technologies that TJ was talking about, where it's simple enough for someone just to go buy something and they can almost self-deploy, that might be an option for you. Also, when you think about home user, this is specific to the home. BYOA, I Googled it. I saw a lot of bring your own application. The term I'm using here is bring your own accessories, okay? If we're deploying monitors for people in the office, does that necessarily mean that we have to take 2 monitors and all the stuff that goes along with their laptop and ship it to their house, okay? If people want to design their own workspace at home, it might be a good idea just to let them do that and let them expense the equipment that they do, as opposed to shipping a lot of stuff back and forth to be able to maintain control of your assets. Okay, so from a policy standpoint, if you're going to think about that, you support what you own. Okay, if you're not purchasing it for the end user and configuring and sending it to them, and they're doing their own stuff with their accessories, if they have issues with it, that really should be their issue to deal with, kind of like getting a Bluetooth headset and making it try to work with your computer. All right, so once you decide on all your product and what you're going to do, how are you going to procure it, and are you going to stock it? A lot of organizations that we've supported over the years have had stock rooms in each one of their locations. Okay, well, the lockdown happened. A lot of people couldn't get into their locations to even get stock and ship it out to their end users. So we got asked a lot, hey, can you guys take this equipment for us and help configure it and ship it directly to the end user as opposed to us doing the final stuff? And it's something that you need to think about, especially if you're going to be consolidating offices and even consolidating activities of what your people are doing. Maybe you need a partner like PDS. Here's where I get into sales mode to actually help do all that stuff if you're not going to be having your own stock rooms anymore. Oh, this is not necessarily a policy, but a practice. Anything that you stock, you want to think about. We've had supply chain challenges, okay? And over the past year, even before COVID hit. So if it takes 6 to 8 weeks or even 12 weeks or maybe even longer, all right, to procure product, you better be stocking equipment that's going to last you over that time for your end users. Configuration and deployment. This is kind of what I was just talking about. With the stocking, if you don't have your techs in a stock room that are configuring equipment and configuring it right down to the end user specifications, what do? Okay, for years, the way we've supported these types of clients is we image them and get them to a certain point and we send them out and then they stock their stock room with it, but then they do the final configuration for the end user, okay? Well, what if that's changed now? Is that something that you use a partner like PDS to be able to do, where we can actually do the customization and migrate profile and data and stuff like that? Yeah. TJ, you got a comment on profile?
And all that kind of stuff. But when we talk about simplifying the workspace, the simpler you can have everything, the easier it's going to be to deploy. And one of those, like you talk about, is profile migration. I say the easiest way to do profile migration is to not do profile migration. Get users used to, I'm not saving your data, I'm not saving your profile. Make sure you're using our network cloud strategies and resources for that stuff.
And that gets down to our policy there at the bottom. Local data is lost data. Make sure they're using OneDrive or similar technologies like that to be able to do it. And from a deployment standpoint, what are the logistics involved, right? Do you ship it directly to their home? There's shipping costs, of course, there. If they had been coming into a local office, you just have them come in and exchange their old device with their new device. We're actually working with one client right now on a drive-through process for their deployment, where they're going to use a parking ramp so that it's somewhat climate controlled, and end users are going to be scheduled to come through, drive in, open up their trunk, pull out their old laptop, put their new one in it, and off they go. So there's different ways of being able to do it based upon the profile of user that you have. Think about that. From a support standpoint, there's, the days of maybe an end user having a device fail and then walking down to the IT guys and into the stock room and going, hey, this thing isn't working. Those are gone for these types of users, obviously. So you need a way to support them. Are you going to do it with spares or replacement devices? What do I mean by that? Well, what happens when a laptop fails today? Do you ship them out a spare unit that they can use while their original one is getting repaired, which then you have to ship the original back and then get the spare back? That is an asset management challenge as well as a logistics challenge, okay? Or do you do the replacement where it's like, okay, you're not going to get your original back, but we'll send you one that's the same make and model. There's challenges with that too. Not everyone takes care of their equipment the same way. And a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want to get a device back that wasn't exactly the same quality that was the one that they had before. Do you do the Office Depot? Okay, where if it breaks, the end user has to drive it in, like we were talking about walking up to the tech room. Do they drive into a certain location and get their device worked on and or pick up a spare or something like that? Whatever you do, think about what warranty that you are purchasing, okay, so that you have the appropriate warranty for it. This is just a point one of our support guys made. He's like, don't overbuy, okay? If you do have a sparing solution in place, don't get 24/7 next day, okay? Because you don't need it. What you do is you get them the spare right away, of course, but you don't need the one that's being repaired to be repaired that quickly. And from a service desk standpoint, think about, when people are working from home, they're not necessarily working just, the normal business hours. They might be working late into the evening or earlier in the morning. Does that necessarily mean you need service desk coverage at that time? Not necessarily, but maybe for certain types of users you do. So think about service desk coverage and how you want to handle that for that part of your workforce. From a retirement standpoint, there's really only a couple of things that you really need to be concerned about, but they're important. Asset accountability is one, right? It's a lot easier to keep your hands on your assets when they are in a controlled environment like your building, okay? You got door security and you've got your local network there where all of your tools work and can pick up all the information about the devices that are on the network. That isn't necessarily the case when they're at a user's house. So you got to think about your asset management system and how the data is populated, what tools are retrieving that data and putting it in there, and how you're going to make sure that you know what device is at what end user's house or wherever they may be. And from a data security standpoint, be thinking about some type of persistent endpoint security. So that's like an absolute software, stuff like that, where you have additional tools out there to help you identify the assets and secure them. I talked with Neil at Cascade regarding policies, and his recommendation was use the NIST 888 guidelines for media to identify risk profiles for the different types of users, okay? You don't necessarily have one policy that fits all. Identify who's really at risk and who has the most critical data, and use that to set the appropriate policy for your remote workers. So in summary, you got to have a plan, and it's a simple one. You don't have to have a perfect plan. Good plan today is better than a perfect one tomorrow. And start out with setting appropriate policies. Okay, don't wait on setting policies until the end. So with that, we are virtually out of time. So if you want to talk to TJ and I, we're going to be up at the virtual bar, having a virtual beer and playing some virtual golf. So you guys have a great rest of your day, and thank you for coming.